1 second. Okay, I was waiting for it to stream to YouTube. Okay, we're going live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And welcome to the September 19, 2022 Rental Housing Committee meeting. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with California Government Code 54953E as authorized by resolution of the Rental Housing Committee. Please contact mvrent@mountainview.gov to obtain a copy of the applicable resolution. All members of the Rental Housing Committee will participate in this meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members of the public wishing to observe the meeting live may do so at mountainview.legistar.com, on YouTube at mountainview.gov/YouTube, and on Comcast Channel 26. As noted on the meeting agenda, members of the public may provide oral public comments during the public comment period for an item by signing up at mountainview.gov/meeting and entering webinar ID 937-7306-8363, or by phone by dialing 669-900-9128 and entering webinar ID 937-7306-8363. Any emails received by 5 p.m. today were forwarded to the Rental Housing Committee. Emails received after 5 p.m. will not be read during the meeting, but will be entered into the record for the meeting. Now, the Rental Housing Committee will enter a separate closed session Zoom meeting to discuss existing litigation regarding the case of Redwood Villa versus City of Mountain View and Mountain View Rental Housing Committee in Santa Clara County Superior Court, case number 18 CV 322991, and Enlightened Investments versus City of Mountain View Rental Housing Committee, City of Mountain View, and that is a Santa Clara Superior Court case number 21 CV 390118. The committee will reconvene on this public Zoom meeting once the closed session has ended. Legal counsel will report any updates from the closed session during the agenda item 11. Now, before we go, would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on the closed session agenda item? If so, please click raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Okay. I am seeing no hands at the moment. So we are going to go to the closed session. We will return back to the Zoom after that closed session is over, approximately maybe 15, 20 minutes, hopefully not much more than that. See you all soon.
Hello, am I in the wrong one? Oh.
Yes.
Okay. So, my goodness. All right, sounds good. Here we go again. I have to get out of this one, right? All right. Leaving.
Do you need me to send you the link again?
Please.
Okay, I'll send it now.
Thank you. Yay.
Everyone has made it back. So good evening and welcome to the September 19th, 2022 Rental Housing Committee meeting open session. The meeting is called to order at 7:41 p.m. We will now proceed with roll call. And Jessica, are you going to help me with roll call?
Yes. Okay. Committee member Greenwald,
Here.
committee member Pardo Gazella,
Present.
committee member Rosas,
Here.
committee member Almond,
Here.
vice chair Ramos,
Present.
chair Haynes Livesay.
Thank you, Jessica. Okay, we will now move to agenda item 5, the consent calendar. These items will be approved by one motion unless any member of the committee wishes to remove an item for discussion. The purpose of the consent calendar is for the committee to efficiently and quickly consider routine or administrative business items with one motion. Although committee members may remove items, it is generally not intended for the committee to have a lengthy, substantive discussion on consent calendar items. Would any member of the committee like to pull an item from the consent calendar? Committee member Pardizella.
5.2.
5.2.
Yes.
Okay, pulling 5.2. Any other items to pull? Okay, I think that's the only one. Do you have one more? Or is that it?
I do not. Sorry.
No problem. Okie dokie. We go down here. Okay, we will now start with agenda item 5.2, which was pulled by committee member Pardizella. This is the adoptive resolution to continue virtual meetings pursuant to the Brown Act provisions as amended by AB 361. Okay, so I actually start with the member of the committee who pulled the item. So committee member Pardizella, please.
Yeah.
Are you going to take action on the rest of the consent calendar before the
Yeah.
pulled item?
Oh, oopsie.
You might want to take a motion, see if there's a motion to approve everything that wasn't pulled, and then we can discuss the item that was pulled.
Okay. Let's do that then. Vice Chair Ramos, do you have a motion for me on the rest of the calendar?
Yes, Chair. I move the balance of the consent calendar minus the item pulled.
I second it.
Excellent. Okay, let's take a vote on everything except for 5.2. This would be the motion to approve agenda item 5.1, the minutes from August 22nd, 2022. I do have a friendly amendment on that. There is an item on the minutes that needs a small administrative correction. Can my motion maker and second confirm they're okay with that?
I'm down.
Me too.
Excellent. And then we'll also have 5.3 to acknowledge the year-end results for the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act Fund for fiscal year ending June 30, 2022. And 5.4 to acknowledge the year-end results for the Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance Fund for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022. And let's do a roll call vote. And Jessica, if you'll help with my roll call vote.
Committee member Pardo Gazella,
Aye.
committee member Rosas,
Aye.
committee member Almond,
Aye.
vice chair Ramos,
Aye.
chair Haynes Livesay.
Hi.
Motion passes unanimously.
Excellent. Okay, now we can do the thing that I was going to start to do. On 5.2, committee member Pardizella, go right ahead.
Well, the point I want to make is that it's been 2.5 years now. 2.5 years. The president has declared the pandemic is over. We are an independent body from city council and the city. And so regardless of what steps the city or city council is taking or has taken prior to the president's announcement on Sunday night, we still as an independent body can follow our own lead on this issue. It's been 2.5 years. The meeting room that we meet in, or we used to meet in 2.5 years ago, is absolutely enormous. It allows every opportunity to social distance. And so I would propose some sort of hybrid model where we can continue with the virtual meetings for people who find it difficult or challenging for whatever reason, or for health reasons, to attend the meetings in person, but still allow people to attend in person, because I think there is a class of people that are not particularly technologically savvy and who do benefit from in-person meetings. So that is my suggestion, some sort of hybrid model. And so I would propose that rather than a continuation after 2.5 years of more virtual meetings.
On that topic, I just wanted to say I actually am very favorable on the idea of going to hybrid model. I think it would be really, really nice to get back into the actual room and sit with y'all. I think there's a lot of benefit there. And I think a hybrid model does allow accommodations for all parties. You have your folks who may not be as technologically savvy, or who just for whatever reason can't get into a phone or video conference. You have accommodations for them. You have accommodations for folks who may not be able to attend in person. I do worry that if we try and go hybrid before the city is supportive, which I know the city has said where they are staying in the fully remote through October 13th. I do have concerns that if we try and go hybrid before the city does, there's a lot of costs that could be associated with doing that. And I don't know about the viability. That would be my concern with not staying in lockstep with the city. Vice Chair Reynolds.
So I actually don't mind going back in a hybrid, because I miss the dais and everything. What I am concerned about is to appear, how do I say this, not cooperative with the city. So I am open to having a collaborative process with the city. We are a separate entity and we can make our own decisions. And that is something that every once in a while gets acknowledged when we don't want it to be acknowledged, and then not acknowledged when we do want it to be acknowledged. It's the curse of our board, I guess. But if there are steps that can be taken to let the city know that this is something we would like to do, and we would like to be collaborative with them to make that happen. I don't know what the steps you would need to take in order for something like that to happen.
I can definitely inform the city and let them know that the rental housing committee is eager to start a hybrid model, and see how they're reacting to that information. I'm not sure when they put their information out that they expect their advisory bodies to adhere. That was also included for the rental housing committee. I don't even know if they wanted to include us in that, but I can definitely let them know and see how they react to that information.
I think that sounds good. If you could, Anki. Committee member Ross. Oh, yes, no, maybe.
I'm sorry, I was going to put a thumbs up that I agree with what's been said.
No, I realized I messed up and I didn't do public comment. So I do need to go back and do public comment. I'm feeling real bad about that. So do we have?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't taken a motion on 5.2, so it's still appropriate to take public comment and then We do need a motion on this. I understand the committee's desire to go hybrid, but to continue through this meeting, it would be good to have this adopted.
Absolutely. Well, let me go to public comment since I did miss that before the last motion. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. And I do see a hand. And a really cool background. Excellent. Let's advance Tim to speaking role.
Okay, thanks. I think you just unmuted me. This is Tim Larson with the Mountain View Mobile Home Alliance. Mostly in the interest of this meeting's time, I think that everybody's interested in some sort of hybrid approach, whether it's every other meeting or once a quarter. You know, you might be in person, as long as you always enable essentially a virtual session or virtual way of joining and contributing from the community. But it seems like this is something that should be properly put on the agenda and discussed, and not sort of put a motion on now during the consent calendar. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And next we have Alexander.
I agree with Tim. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, now committee, I will bring it back for further discussion and or motion here. Vice Chair Reynolds.
So I move to adopt a resolution of the Rental Housing Committee of the City of Mountain View, making the findings for authorizing continued remote teleconference meetings of the Rental Housing Committee pursuant to Brown Act provisions as amended by Assembly Bill number 361 to be read in title only. Further reading waived. And I also include empowering staff to reach out to city staff about our desire to go virtual. We could even offer being the guinea pigs. I'm totally down with that.
I like it. And I will actually second that motion, especially the part about let's empower staff to start getting us to be some guinea pigs. I like being a guinea pig. And Jessica, can you help me with the roll call vote?
Committee member Pardo DeZella,
Aye.
committee member Rosas,
Yes.
committee member Almond,
Aye.
vice chair Ramos,
Yes.
chair Haynes Livesay.
Mm.
Motion passes unanimously.
Hopefully some new good stuff to come on that. Now we will open the meeting for oral public comment from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the committee from acting on non-agenda items. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on a non-agenda item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Okay, I am seeing none. Moving right along to new business. We will now move to agenda item 9.1, monthly status reports, July and August 2022. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
Good evening, committee members, and thank you, Chair Haynes Livesay. This evening, we have a brief presentation on the monthly status report for the months of July and August. We're only going to report the August report because it includes the July numbers as well. And again, this is the brief overview. We'll have a more in-depth one at the end of the quarter, which we'll be reporting in October. So far, through the end of August, we've had 365 public inquiries made, 30% of which have been with Spanish as the primary language. And the biggest topic for the current fiscal year has still revolved around eviction protections. We've held 6 workshops, had 9 office hours, provided support to 89 households and community members. And then you'll see here something that I wanted to highlight. We've held 13 or participated in 13 eviction help center clinics and pop-up events. This is pop-up events for the rent stabilization program and the housing and eviction help center. And we've reached 542 people through these so far through the end of August. We've really connected with the school districts and been able to do some very impactful outreach there. And because of that, we did see an increase in people attending the Housing and Eviction Help Center and coming to our offices as well. We've had 2 mass mailings. We've sent out 138 targeted letters, and we have 927 email subscribers. So that number has jumped up. We've held 26 mediations and conciliations, 12 of which have been resolved. And we have a few pending from last year in this number as well. We've received 76 banked rent increase notices and 88 termination notices. Through the end of the August time period, we've had 145 failure to pay rent notices. Again, this is trending just about the same that we've seen. We haven't had a huge cliff like we were anticipating. So it appears like things are stabilizing a little bit in our termination system, and that is great. To highlight relocation assistance and properties in redevelopment, again, we have no properties in redevelopment for this calendar year. We have no units affected, and we have had 2 households that have received assistance through August. For the current fiscal year, we have 3 petitions in the hearing process, and we still have some petitions that are outstanding and in review from the prior fiscal year. So you'll see there's also 4 over there. We have received more inquiries with relationship to hardship petitions and unlawful rent petitions. So those are both happening. We also have received an increase just in people inquiring about petitions in general. And we believe that has something to do with not only the trust that we've built in the community, but also with the extensive outreach that we've been doing. For market conditions, as you can see here, vacancy rates are dropping significantly still. We are down well below the threshold of 5% to 4.1% for fully covered units. And as you can see, they're stabilizing a little bit, but they're very low right now across the board. Now, when you look at the newly built units, I just want to remind everyone that every time a new building comes back online, the vacancy rate spikes for newly covered units, and that's what you're seeing in these numbers here. So that will drop as those units are filled. And we'll probably see another spike at the beginning of the calendar year. I think that there's another large complex coming online, so that will change in the future as well. It's just a reminder, it's a very unstable number, and that makes our all units number a little bit higher than it actually is. Now, for average market rent, the market has fully rebounded to above the 2020 dive that took place because of COVID. So we are above what it was. And now the average market rate for a fully covered unit is $2,756 in the city of Mountain View. We are going to change the monthly status report a little bit. Some of the information will be expanded. We're going to break this down into unit size so you can see some differentiations in the market as we expand the report. For property sales for fully covered units, we have had 1 so far this fiscal year for a total of 12 units. And we have 5 properties that are currently up for sale for a total of 63 units. So again, this is just properties that are transacting, And typically they transact, there's no redevelopment on the property. It's a simple market transaction. And that concludes the monthly status report for August and July. Are there any questions for staff?
Any questions, committee? I do have one question. Patricia, for the breakdown that we're going to do by unit size, that's going to be like studio 1, 2, 3 bedroom, right? It's not going to be square footage.
Studio 1, 2, 3 bedroom is how it's reported. So that's how we gather the information. We don't go above 3 units because the market is very small and it actually skews the numbers. So yeah, you're exactly right there, Chair.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I now invite public comments. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Okie dokie. Seeing none, we will now go to committee deliberations and provide feedback. Does anyone have any feedback they'd like to provide on the status report? Well, my feedback is I'm very excited to see that breakdown by unit size. That sounds cool. Okie dokie. Well, if everybody's going to be quiet for now, we will now move on to agenda item 9.2, the CSFRA and MHRSO compliance and enforcement mechanisms. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
Thank you, Chair. The moment has come. So I'm going to do an overview of 9.2, which is the purpose of this agenda item is to review and adopt amendments to CSFRA regulations and MHRSO regulations to add Chapter 12 compliance and general remedies. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, the CSFRA and MHRSO provide the Rental Housing Committee with broad authority to establish rules and regulations for the administration and enforcement of the act and the ordinance, including the ability to establish penalties and to publicize the rights and obligations of landlords and tenants under the law. Next slide. So as background, we've discussed this a few times now, but the MHRSO and CSFRA both have what are considered substantial requirements. There are 5 substantial requirements, including the payment of annual fees, registration requirements for the properties, a requirement that landlords, park owners, or mobile home landlords roll back rents in accordance with the law, that they comply with allowable rent adjustments, and lastly, that they comply with health and safety requirements, which include both state health and safety laws, local health and safety laws, as well as orders of hearing officers and the rent board. So non-compliance with these substantial requirements means a landlord cannot raise rents or file a petition for upward adjustment of rent. Next slide. So again, we've gone through this a little bit, but the CSFRA and the MHRSO have some built-in enforcement mechanisms already. And I won't go through these in depth, but they're up here for you to review. These include that non-compliance may prevent or may serve as an affirmative defense in an eviction case. We talked about the inability to impose a rent increase or file a petition for upward adjustment, as well as legal remedies that are provided to both the tenants and the rental housing committee, as well as the city. So while there are these built-in mechanisms for enforcement of the MHRSO and the CSFRA, there are some barriers to the utilization of these mechanisms. The first being informational. Tenants lack the information necessary to, know when to file a petition or when to oppose a rent increase. For instance, a tenant may not know their landlord is out of compliance with payment of rental housing fees when they receive a notice for an annual notice of rent increase. And so they might just end up paying because they don't actually know that their landlord was not allowed to impose that rent increase. Additionally, in addition to the informational barrier, there's the RHC also lacks affirmative tools short of a lawsuit to proactively enforce the requirements of the CSFRA and MHRSO. A lot of the mechanisms that are in the CSFRA and MHRSO are complaint based, and so the RHC has to wait for someone to complain about an issue before they can do anything to enforce the requirements. So for instance, the RHC may reject a landlord's petition for upward adjustment of rent and require compliance before accepting the petition, but that's only after the landlord chooses to file the petition. There's no way to act proactively ensure that they comply with those requirements. Next slide, please. So at the March 28th meeting, which was the first time that the enforcement and compliance mechanisms were recently discussed, staff presented 5 potential enforcement mechanisms, and ultimately the rental housing committee directed staff to bring back more information about 4 out of the 5 of these enforcement mechanisms, including non-compliance letters, a non-compliance database or website listing, late fees for failure to pay annual fees or register properties, as well as an administrative citation program. At the August 22nd meeting, after staff presented additional information on those 4 options, the rental housing committee directed staff to return with draft regulations for options 1 through 3, which are the ones that we will be reviewing tonight. So option 1, as a reminder, would be to expand the practice of sending non-compliance letters to landlords for all failures to comply with substantial requirements. Right now, these letters are sent to landlords who fail to pay their annual fees. This option and the draft regulations would expand this practice so that these non-compliance letters are sent to landlords who do not comply with any of the 5 substantial requirements. This is a tool that will help address the informational gap, because one part of the draft regulations and what the RHC directed staff to do was to provide affected tenants with copies of these non-compliance notices or letters after having given landlords an opportunity to first correct the issue. The second option, as a summary, was the website listing. So this would be adapting the database that's currently being used for registration and other purposes to create a public-facing portion that would indicate non-compliant properties, and that could be accessed by the public, including tenants, to determine whether or not a property or a landlord is in compliance with the requirements of the CSFRA or MHRSO. And the vendor for the registration database has confirmed that the portal can be updated to create this public search option. And then as a reminder for the third option, currently the Rental Housing Committee imposes a 1% per month late fee for failure to timely pay any annual housing fees, and that is capped at 12% maximum. The RHC currently does not impose any late fee for failure to register properties. At the last meeting, RHC directed staff to model the penalty regulations based on policies adopted by Santa Monica for the failure to pay annual fees, and East Palo Alto for the failure to register. And there's a summary of those down below. The draft regulations are presented with the following sections, and we will go through in-depth sections C through F of these. Next slide. So section C of the proposed regulations would create a procedure for non-compliance notices. Initial non-compliance notices of non-compliance will be sent only to landlords upon learning of a violation of a substantial requirement, and the landlord will be provided 30 days to cure the violation. So taking, for example, the registration requirement, landlords are required to complete registration of their properties annually by February 1st. And so if they do not comply with that requirement, a notice will be sent to them on or after February 2nd. They will have 30 days to go back and, do the registration. If they do not comply in that 30-day period, a second notice of non-compliance will be sent with a copy to the affected tenants. And then the copy that's sent to any affected tenants will include a CSFRA and MHRSO information sheet that provides tenants with more information about their rights in the particular instance when their landlord is not in compliance with the law. So with code inspections, we did want to provide some additional information as far as the health and safety substantial requirement. So the goal of the city is to complete inspections of multifamily properties every 5 years, and potentially that could get bumped up to every 8 years, depending on if there were no prior violations. So you'll see in the next section, which talks about the database, we decided based on that information, it didn't make sense to include that information in the database. However, staff does plan to periodically reach out to the city as well as the California Department of Housing and Community Development, which are the ones who do code inspections for mobile home parks, to gather information about whether properties are in compliance or not. So that will sort of be a collaborative process as far as figuring out if CSFRA covered or MHRSO covered properties are not in compliance. And then they will send an update on, the non-compliance implications. And it's possible that, code enforcement will provide a landlord that's in violation with a certain period of time, 45 days or something like that to correct the issues. If that's the case, the landlord may still be out of compliance with the CSFRA or MHRSO before that 45 days is up, just because their property is not has the issue to begin with. Okay, so section D of the proposed regulations provide for the creation of a publicly accessible database. The database will show the following information. So the property address, as well as the assessor's parcel number, so that people are able to easily identify the property that they are looking for, as well as the year the property was built, the number of units on the property, whether the property is fully or partially covered by the CSFRA or the MHRSO, the status of the payment of the annual fees, and the annual registration status. And to expand a little bit on the different statuses, so the way that the current database works, what's indicated is, because I know there were some concerns and questions about what if the landlord doesn't fill out the information for one unit? Are they going to be considered out of compliance? And the way that the database is currently set up is sort of an all or nothing type of system. So the database knows how many units are on each property. So let's say if there's 12, the landlord will not be able to submit the registration unless they have filled out information for all 12. They will physically not be able to press the submit button. It won't light up the way that it needs to submit. And so if they missed one unit, if they didn't put in information for one unit, that submit button will not even light up to let them. And in that case, their registration status will show up as registration not submitted, and they would be in non-compliance, or they would, that would indicate non-compliance. So there's like not really as much of a concern there that small minor mistakes will lead to a determination that a landlord is out of compliance and will result in the sending of the non-compliance notices or showing up on the website. So to summarize the various statuses, just so folks understand, for the annual, the payment of the annual fees, there's 3 different statuses that can be indicated on a specific property. That's either payment period open, so that would be the period from the time that the invoice is sent, February 1st, which is the deadline to make the payment. And then the second status is fees paid. So that means that the landlord has received the invoice and has timely paid their annual rental housing fees. And then the third status is fees not paid, which means that the landlord was sent a failed to pay. And so if on the website it shows fees not paid for a specific landlord, that means that that indicates that the landlord is not in compliance with the payment of the annual fees. Similarly, for the annual registration status, there's 4 different statuses that could potentially show on a certain property. The first is registration open. Again, that is the period of time when registration is open each year for landlords to register their properties. That usually starts sometime in December. And runs through February 1st. So if the status remains registration open after February 2nd, that means that the property has failed to timely complete their annual registration, and that would indicate non-compliance. The second status is registration submitted. That means that the landlord has completed their annual registration and staff is reviewing it for completeness. They would not be considered out of compliance in this interim period because they have done their duty and submitted the information. Staff is just checking it over to make sure that it's accurate. The third is registration accepted. That means that the landlord has completed their annual registration, staff has reviewed it and accepted it. And a landlord status may update to registration accepted while the registration period is still open. Depending on, if they decide to be super diligent and submitted on December 2nd, right after the registration period opens, staff might get to review it before the end of January when the registration period closes. And then the last is registration not submitted. This means that the annual registration period has closed and the landlord has not submitted anything. And so they would also be considered, or this would also indicate non-compliance on the part of the landlord. And sorry, just one last thing, you don't need to go back to the last slide, but as I mentioned, because of the difficulty of getting information about the health and safety issues, that is sort of why I summarized this before, but that's the reason why we decided to leave that off, although previous staff reports had indicated that a landlord's compliance with health and safety would be indicated on this database. We want to make sure that we have the most up-to-date information, and because the information is provided so sparsely and so far apart, it would be difficult to maintain that. And so it doesn't really make sense. And so in that instance, tenants can reach out to the program instead to say, hey, do you know of any code violations or issues? And staff can provide the information that way rather than putting it on a website where it might not get updated as often and might be inaccurate. So section E, it outlines the schedule of late fees that would be imposed where a landlord fails to timely pay their annual rental housing fees or fails to timely complete their annual registration. So for the annual housing and space fees, a 4% per month fee would be charged on any unpaid balances, if not paid within 30 days of the due date. And then for annual registration of the property, a $25 per unit per month fee would be charged after February 1st of each year. And the regulations do provide, the draft regulations do provide that any unpaid balance would roll over to new owners. As well as if there's a landlord that currently has unpaid fees for their annual housing and space fees, the 4% would begin accruing as soon as on that existing balance, as soon as the regulations go into effect if adopted. Next slide. So this is to talk about the effective date would be December 1st. This is intended to coincide with the annual rental housing and space fees payment requirement and the annual registration period. And so essentially it would, this cycle would be the first when these regulations would be used if adopted. So while staff's recommendation is to review and adopt the draft amendments, there are some alternative actions that the committee could choose to take tonight. The first would be to review and adopt the draft regulations with amendments. If there are certain portions that you agree upon as a committee that you don't like and you want changed, you can make amendments. The second would be to direct staff to revise regulations for consideration at a future meeting. The third would be to direct staff to hold stakeholder meetings to request input on these draft regulations. And then the last would be to choose to table adoption of one or more of these enforcement mechanisms for the time being. And I think that's the last slide. Oh, fiscal impact. So just to talk about how these regulations might impact the RHC budget. The adoption of the regulations may increase revenue through increased payment of annual fees and or late fees. However, administration of the draft regulations will increase expenditures through one, the development of a public-facing database section that has some costs associated with it, as well as increased staff time for the implementation and administration of these enforcement mechanisms, sending out letters and manually putting in some of the information into the public database, et cetera, will increase staff time. So yeah, that is just something for your consideration. And I think that might actually be the last slide. Oh, no, okay. So just to reiterate, staff's recommendation is to review and adopt the amendments to CSFRA regulations and MHRSO regulations to add Chapter 12, compliance and general remedies. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Vice Chair Ramos, you have a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. These questions are gonna jump around and really don't have any connection to each other, but they kind of came up in my head. Since there are two regulations, is that two separate motions, or can one motion work for both regulations?
I think you can just do it with one motion.
Okay, then the second one is, should this pass, could we get a suggested letter of non-compliance in a future agenda packet? It doesn't have to be the next one, but like something that we can see how it'll look and if there's any feedback related to it. I believe also there was a letter by the League of Women Voters asking for that to be in accessible languages as well. So is that's possible? We're good.
We sent all our letters out in multiple languages. Yes.
Awesome. And then the third one, this also had to do with correspondence. There was a suggestion by someone asking for like a compliance focus group, essentially. I don't know. What I don't want to do is add more to staff's plate, but I'm trying to think of ways to fulfill something like that without adding to staff's plate. And I was wondering, other committees, like for example, the HRC, which constantly, because of the initials are the same, but different order, they have things like subcommittees where they have like certain members of, they have the 7-member committees. So their subcommittees could be 3 people. In our case, it would be 2 people. But is it possible for like, I don't know, I think the chair technically appoints who are on subcommittees, or generally people say, I want to do that and no one else wants to do it. And so those are the people ending up doing whatever it is. But like, could they as subcommittees host these focus groups on ways to improve the system in general? And what I want to do is just ensure that there's dialogue and an open door, which I understand staff has been very good at doing their best trying to get that open door, but sometimes you need a different person opening the door and that makes other people feel better. It happens. So what kind of options would be available for something like that? It's sort of tangentially related to this because it was sent, there was a suggestion like this was in response to something like this, but like our actions tonight aren't contingent on something like that. I just want to see what kind of options are open for that.
Karen, you can give the legal opinion, but I don't think there's any hindrances in suggesting anything like that.
No, you could either direct staff to do it or have a subcommittee of the RHC.
If you want me to appoint people to subcommittees, I don't mind doing it as victims or volunteers.
You have to create the subcommittee first.
Sorry, before committee member Grunwald, just a follow-up question. Does that have to be a separate item on the agenda, or can that be something that we can vote tonight?
This would be a subcommittee to do and which one are you asking for, staff to do focus groups or to have a subcommittee?
Well, I'm not inclined to give staff more work. And that was why I had the idea of the subcommittees, because then the subcommittee could do the work and then staff can do the other work that we have tasked them to do, because we've asked a lot of staff.
Yeah, just as a reminder, being a subcommittee usually is all the preparation work comes from the staff as well.
Mhm.
Right.
I didn't think
So
it was, but that's okay.
if you want to have a subcommittee, I think that needs to be a separate agenda item. And to craft both a charge for the subcommittee and the number of people that would be on it, and whether it would be an ad hoc subcommittee or a standing committee, because they have different Brown Act requirements, and how many RHC members would be on the committee. So there would need to be a little work to go into it.
All right. That was my way of trying to make it easier, but I guess it doesn't make it easier. Thank you.
Member Greenwald.
Thank you. I had a question about slide 29 of the presentation. If we could pull that up.
I am unable to see the slide numbers for some reason on the way this is. So when I get there, can you just let me know?
Yeah, sure. It says 9.2 option number 1, compliance letters.
Probably at the beginning. Closer to the beginning, I guess.
Yeah, keep going. Keep going.
There you go.
There it is.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah. My question is about what is substantial non-compliance, and how we'll define that. So as I look at these, the 5 bullet points, right? So failure to pay annual rental housing fee and space fees, that's pretty clear. We would know whether they've sent the check in. Failure to register the property. Let's say someone, the landlord comes in to register the property, they have filled out their information, and then the unit, if they say this building has 50 units, then would 50, they would not be fully registered or would not have submitted their registration until all 50 units, all the fields for those 50 units had been submitted. So it looks like there's like 9 fields per unit. Is that correct?
I don't know by the 9 fields, but yes, they have to fill out the 50 unit information.
Got it. The fields, and that's actually leads to my next question. So the 9 fields that I'm seeing are like, it's occupied by the tenant and not the landlord themselves. That's one of it. They're not looking for tenant name, but you're just looking for whether it's the tenant or the landlord who's in the unit. Is that right?
That's to assess whether there's an exemption to the CSFRA if an owner lives in one of the units.
Right. And then move-in date, rent, base rent, and base rent going back to, base rent, date of last rent increase, lastly, last monthly rent increase amount, rent increase percent, and then the submitter's information is that, which has first name, last name, phone, and email. That's required for each of the 50 units.
Correct.
Okay. And so for the next bullet point on this slide, failure to comply with rollback provisions, how would we know that?
That is a good question, because mostly it will come to light when a landlord is trying to file a petition. And that's when we see whether or not the rollback provisions have been complied with.
Got it. And that was getting to my question. So that, or a tenant files a petition saying that it's not been rolled back yet.
Correct. Yes.
Got it. So it would be petition based. So if a landlord went into those fields that are going to be part of each unit's information, and they entered it, and it was clear that, you know, currently the person's being charged 40% higher than the base rent, which we have not had that many. AGAs would not add up to that right now, right? So it would clearly be an infraction if you were to look at the data fields, but we would not do a calculation to then say you were out of compliance based on what you entered.
Right now, we
correct?
haven't, yeah, right now we're not doing that yet because the compliance with just registering the properties are not high enough. But that would be an option in our database to start looking for that.
And I do think it's my understanding, Andrea's not here, and I think she's the main one who does this, but she does, like I said, there is a period after a landlord submits the registration where staff reviews it. And so she did say, when we talked to her about this, that if something seems really off, she will flag that. You know, if it does look like they received a 15% increase over last year, she will flag that. So it is possible that, you know, that staff would become aware of it through the database and then would send
That's
a non-compliance letter. And then the landlord, you know, will have the 30 days to come in and say, oh, I actually just made a mistake and typed it in incorrectly, and this is the real, you know, number. Or they can say, no, I did charge a 15% rent increase, in which case they would be out of compliance and would need to roll back the rent.
Right, and I think that's what I'm trying to bring light to, is that we have been described to this point as a complaint-based system, and that if we are preventing landlords from registering because we're manually reviewing the registration and saying we actually found an infraction, so you were actually out of non-compliance, we are no longer a complaint-based system. Or sorry, maybe to have that as a question, then we have moved from being a complaint-based system to an oversight. Or I'm not sure what the correct terminology is for that, but it's no longer complaint-based.
I mean, Anki, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're not preventing them from registering because of that, but there might be a non-compliance letter sent.
Yeah, so all that's happening right now is that we send them a non-compliance letter. Right? That's all we're doing.
But they're still registered if they put in the information for each of the units. We may have flagged it, but they're still registered.
Yeah,
right. So on the database, on the public facing database, their status would not be something that would indicate that they are out of compliance. They would only become, you know, a tenant will only become aware of the landlord being out of compliance when the second notice is sent in this case.
But entering that information into the database is in itself going to lead to non-compliance. If it's clear that you had a 15% AGA increase for one of your units,
well,
and that is covered.
That's exactly what we were trying to accomplish with these enforcement measures that we are discussing right now, is to make this visible.
Yeah, and entering it is not the non-compliance. The non-compliance is the excessive rent.
Correct.
So when the landlord gave that rent increase, they became non-compliant.
Correct, and I'm not saying that they should, sorry, I'm not advocating that someone should, you know, not be within the bounds of the CSFRA. But to this point, we have described ourselves as a complaint-based system, and that we are educating tenants with, they can call into a number and get all the information they need about whether their rent increase is legit, and but that we are not overseeing. And I think, I mean, if we're moving to that, because it seems like the entry of information will lead to your being out of compliance because you're sending that second letter and then you're out of compliance. No, sorry, people are shaking their head. So
no.
Okay, so I guess,
go ahead.
Let me explain. So what happens is that the registration period opens sometime in December, and they have until February 1st to fill out the information. If you fill out all of the information, like I said, there's 12 units, you fill out those 9 fields for all of those 12 units, and you click the submit button, your status on the database is going to show up as registration submitted. And therefore, any tenant who looks on there will not be able to know that you're out of compliance with an AGA, because all that's indicating is that you're out of compliance with the registration requirement. So, so your registration status on the database is registration submitted. Staff then takes the time to review and go through the information that you've submitted. If they see something that, for instance, that you gave a 15% rent increase over last year, what they're going to send you a non-compliance letter for is not your failure to register. You've registered, you've provided the information. What they're going to send you a non-compliance letter for is a failure to abide by the AGA increases, right? So then you have 30 days to either come to staff and say, hey, the information I submitted, it was actually a typo. You know, I didn't mean to do that. That's not the rent increase I gave. In which case it'll be corrected. No second non-compliance letter will be sent to anybody. If you come in and say, yeah, I gave that 15% rent increase and I'm not willing to roll it back, then a second non-compliance letter is going to be sent to you and to the tenant. If you come in and say, oh, I didn't realize that I wasn't allowed to give a 15% rent increase, I'll roll it back right now, and you do that within the 30 days that's provided to you, again, no second non-compliance letter is going to be sent to anybody. Does that help clarify the process?
And well, and I just want to add to that. I mean, I understand the point you're making that this is primarily a complaint-based system. It is still a complaint-based system. There is no step after that letter to the tenant or the property owner that will be taken unless you, the RHC, and the city council, because we cannot bring affirmative litigation without the city council's consent, agree to it. So this is the only step that would happen, would be these letters that would get sent, and then it's really up to the tenant to do something about it. And if they don't, then it just goes on and the landlord continues to receive the rent increase that was improper.
But would the landlord would they receive a fee of any sort, automatic fee based on that, or no?
No.
The
No,
fees,
because they're not
Fees
out of
are failure to register and failure to pay fees.
Yeah. They're not, like I said, they're not receiving a non-compliance letter for failure to register, in which case they would incur a fee, the $25 per unit that they didn't do properly. They've registered. They're out of compliance with the allowable rent adjustment. And there's no like Karen said, there's no next step after the second compliance.
and there is no, you guys did not adopt a fee for not complying with that part. There is no fee for that, late fee or anything.
Got it. Thank you. And so the registration would not be held back, or sorry, they would still be registration open if
it would be registration submitted, and so no one
Okay.
could base non-compliance based on that status. Yeah, that would not be.
Got it. And then when we get to next year, let's say no tenant ends up filing a petition. Maybe it's a 4-unit complex and no one cares. The next time the registration comes through the following year, if that will no longer, and they didn't have an AGA that was given that was above the allowable increase, would they then go into, would the compliance still hold indefinitely from that prior information that was given, or does it reset on the annual?
Yeah, so if you charge rent above what the permitted base rent is plus valid AGAs, then you are not in compliance with the CSFRA or the MHRSO. So yes, if they charged a 15% rent increase 1 year, and then the next year they decided to comply with the AGA, or the next 5 years they decided to comply with the AGA, eventually if a tenant decides to file a petition, those would likely all be considered invalid rent increases because they were charged after an invalid rent increase was given based on the wrong number.
But it's only going to be based on a tenant petition,
Right.
that the substantial non-compliance for charging an improper rent is going to be addressed at this point in time. There will not be any further action from the RHC about that. So they're in substantial non-compliance whether we send them a letter or not. The tenant can file a petition, whether we send them a letter or not. So all we are doing is adding a letter that may go out if we notice something in the registration that indicates that they may have taken a rent increase that was not allowed.
Thank you. And last question, I'll give it, and there are other folks waiting. So is there penalty for lying, essentially? Like, because again, if you're trying to put your shoes of somebody who's filling this out and they did give a 10% increase, and they, let's say 2 years ago, they're filling out that information and put in the wrong rate or miscalculate it because maybe the initial time was a miscalculation. We're
Okay.
yeah,
I can
yeah. I mean,
tell you.
is there any penalty for that, or
Yeah,
it still
no.
requires a
So
petition?
that
Yeah.
will then if as a consequence of that, the tenant files a petition and the hearing officer sees the real numbers in the petition, which are different from what he may have wrongly entered into the database, he will make his decision based on the actual data been received. If that answers your question.
But no, there's no penalty from the RHC for an error or anything that was made previously.
Correct.
Okay.
And I
Thank
just
you.
went ahead and brought up the late fee schedule that is being proposed. And as you can see, there's no proposal related to incorrectly completing the registration or even having a, compliance issue outside of not having paid the fees or registering the property. So these are the only proposals related to fees at this time.
So your regulations only say that failure to complete the registration is substantial noncompliance. It doesn't say failure to complete it truthfully.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yes, that's what I was trying to get at. Is I want to be clear on. I just wanted to be clear on what registration meant. And yeah, if there's fields there, that somebody put in fields is compliance. But then, as always, anyone can file a petition. Any tenant can file a petition at any time to have that information reviewed by a hearing officer. All right, thank you.
Committee Member Rosas?
Okay, thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak or ask a question. So my question to staff is, would a 3-month wait be too long to wait until we send the second letter? What I'm concerned is, I don't want staff to be overburdened. I want them to be able to look at the application and say, oh, okay, this doesn't look right. But then they have a whole bunch of applications that came in that month. Want to make sure that they're looking at this thoroughly and without being rushed so that we don't create mistakes. And then the other thing is so that the landlord will understand and know that they're getting ample time for them to respond these applications correctly.
It's up to the rental housing committee to decide how you would like to structure these late payment months and the second payment. This is what we picked up from you in the last meeting. So you can let us know if you would like a different kind of system.
Well, I think where I'm going at is, I guess the question is for you, Anki, and your experience and when you get these applications, what is the level of stress that you all are facing as well?
Well, we have to check, I mean, half of it is done by the database. It just gives us an overview at the end of February, January, who has registered and who has not registered. And we can equally run a whole Excel sheet to see whether the fees were paid in time or not. So that is all doable. I think where it becomes a little bit more staff intends is when there's non-compliance and we have to keep following up. But that is something that we are already preparing for. So any system you think is the most valuable in trying to accomplish the purpose of these regulations will be administered by staff.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I had a few questions. To start off with, I just want to confirm, when we are defining compliance and non-compliance, we are using the traditional definition, meaning, and I'm going to use an analogy here because I think it'll become more clear to folks. When I am speeding and doing 95 down the 101, I am out of compliance with the law. When a police officer sees me speeding down the 101 at 95 and I get a ticket, that is enforcement based on my non-compliance. But my non-compliance began the moment my speedometer went over the legal speed limit, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'm getting nods that that is correct. So it's not around we're making anyone compliant or non-compliant because we cannot force an action or cause inaction. It's about whether or not that information is being communicated out.
So the ultimate purpose is to increase compliance with the CSFRA and the MHRSO. And this is a first step for the Rental Housing Committee to kind of hopefully work toward that goal.
Okay. So with that being said, couple of more minutia questions here. So with the non-compliance letters, would we, I think maybe where a committee member also is going with this, and another way I'm thinking of it too, is perhaps we need to give more time between the first letter, which goes just to the landlord, and the second that goes to the landlord and the tenant. Would we have some ability to have discretion there? Do we need to write that into the regulations if we're going to grant ourselves discretion, or are we confident the language is loose enough that if they didn't go out 30 days perfectly, we wouldn't have an issue?
I think, the language is broad enough that the 30 days is really meant as the compliance period for the landlord and not so much as the period when staff has like these hard deadlines that they have to send things out by. It's saying, landlord, if you do this in 30 days, great. If you don't do it in 30 days, then at some point after that has expired, we're going to send you a second notice. And include it with your tenant. So I think the 30 days is really intended to put landlords on notice of how much time they will have to come into compliance.
Well, how much do we estimate the adding the search feature to the database will be? Because I know we've received a lot of feedback recently that there's other tech enhancements that our stakeholders are really wanting. And I just want to make sure that we're thinking of actual costs and not putting those tech enhancements to the side.
Yeah. So the tech enhancement where property owners can download annual registration through an Excel sheet is already being worked on by the third-party developer. So that's put in motion. And for this tenant-facing database section, the estimated amount came back to us as $5,000.
Excellent. Thank you. And final question on the regs for the MHSRO. That one says the effective date is January 1, whereas the regs for the CSFRA say December 1. Are those different because we were trying to make them different? Is one not supposed, like, are they supposed to say the same date? Do you see what I mean?
It is a clerical error. So it
December is our target.
December 1 for all of them because that's when the registration begins. So maybe if someone makes a motion, a friendly amendment would be helpful there.
Okay. I just didn't know if maybe we were running them cattywampus for a reason. Thank you. Any other questions before I go to public comment? And then we'll come back for deliberation. Committee member Grinwald.
Thank you. Question for staff. Currently, the only fields that would be publicly searchable would be what was on, I don't have a slide number, but it was mostly about the building information and whether the fee was paid. If someone were to submit a FOIA request for unit level information, is that public information? Would anyone be able to get that currently, or are there future plans to make that available?
If somebody's submitted a Public Records Act request, most of that information would be a public record. Information that might result in identity theft or violate privacy would be withheld, but the rest of the information would be public record, as it is currently.
Got it. So, and then do we have, maybe this question for the team, like how far back would we keep that information? So for unit A in, 100 Castro Street, would we show or would we keep historical rent information at the unit level indefinitely right now?
Well, yes.
Yeah, I think that you would.
All right, thank you.
Committee member Almond.
Just briefly, there was some mention of having the staff having discretion over when they would send out notices. I think for everybody's involved, we should decide on the amount of time and then stick to that, because I'd hate to have some housing provider say, oh my God, you gave them 45 days and you only gave me 30, and it could really mess us up quite a bit. So I'm hoping we can come up with consistent regulations. That's all. Thanks.
Okay. Committee member Pardinella, do you have a question? We will go to comments after public comments.
I have a question for council.
Yes.
So my question is, I'm looking at section 1709 of the CSFRA, and I see that there's a provision there that permits the RHC to subpoena witnesses as well as documents. And my question is, could we use that as a mechanism along with a compliance letter in whatever form to essentially send the compliance letter to a landlord, at the same time serving them with a subpoena, which instructs them to appear before staff, and it could be by Zoom, to explain why they have not responded to our outreach efforts or otherwise been in compliance. So the idea would simply be to use our subpoena power, which to my knowledge, we've never used in the past, but which is set forth in section 1709 D subsection 6, as a way to potentially create some dialogue, real-time dialogue between the landlords that are not compliant and our staff. And again, it could be by Zoom, where there could be dialogue about why they're not in compliance and what can be done to bring them into compliance. So that's my question. Is that a mechanism that we could use, or what challenges would be associated with doing that?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead. I mean, yes, that is a possibility. We have looked into how far you could go with your subpoena power.
Okay.
I mean, you could issue a subpoena, but if the person subpoenaed didn't comply, we would have to go into court to enforce it. So we have looked into this on behalf of hearing officers who have requested information and have found that it might not be the most useful tool, because unless we're willing to go into court to seek compliance, it's very easy for anyone that we might subpoena to just avoid us.
Tricia, did you want to say something?
I just, since Andrea is not here, wanted to mention that we currently and will continue to reach out to property owners who are not in compliance, who haven't registered or who haven't paid their fees, through the other systems as well. So the database actually sends out, we can do push notifications, we can do different types of outreach, not just these compliance letters. I'm sure that we would do that type of outreach before the compliance letter went out. Now we currently, have call the property owners when they're not in compliance for the rental housing fee. Andrea is actually quite gifted at that. And it will continue to do so, utilize all methods of communication to ensure that as much as possible, people are in compliance and are aware of the requirements before any of these compliance mechanisms go into effect.
New member Pardo, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, just following up on that. So understood that a person or a corporation can ignore a subpoena as always, and they could do so here, but putting that aside, whether they could ignore the subpoena and the fact that we would then have to take some sort of affirmative steps to get their compliance. I guess my question is, would that though be a mechanism that we could choose to use where we could subpoena a provider, a housing entity, and say, listen, here's a subpoena, here's a compliance letter, and instead of, let's say, ignoring it, the subpoena is saying, 9 a.m. next week, you got to dial in on Zoom and talk to Amki. And sure, they might blow us off, but I guess my question is, would that mechanism work procedurally in terms of it being an appropriate mechanism where at least we could get some dialogue going, rather than just kind of these letter writing campaigns that I think might not be as effective? That's my question.
I think that is really a policy question for the RHC, if that's the path you want to take. I mean, you have that power to issue subpoenas. You could delegate that to staff after a certain number of letters to issue a subpoena, if that's one way you chose to enforce the CSFRA.
As a follow-up to that question, would we also potentially have the ability to put out an online scheduler where maybe it's not we compel you as via subpoena, but we offer times that we have availability that they can easily schedule, maybe with a QR code, because I really like those in the letters?
We definitely already do that. We have office hours for landlords. We communicate that repeatedly throughout each month. As you may have noticed in the monthly data, there were quite a few landlords that called us with registration questions. So that for those who want to contact us, I think they do get a lot of information on how to reach us. Emails, letters, phone calls, you name it. So I think that is not the problem, that they don't have any information where to reach us.
Member Grunwald, do you have a final question before we go to public comment?
I do. I'll try to keep this short, or as short as I can. Our system also records when an individual record on a unit was modified, right? So that it would know, let's say a landlord is not aware that they need to be updating any move in or move out within 30 days of the move in, move out. And so they submit the registration saying that in June of last year, they had they had not recorded that there was a move out within the 30 days. Two questions. One, who determines what substantial non-compliance is? Like if they had 6 move outs across 10 units and had not recorded any of them within 30 days versus 1 unit, who determines whether that was non-compliance?
I think that would be really hard to tell until they've actually updated it, in which case they would then be in compliance. And there would be no non-compliance at that point.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
And so for my second part of the question, it's like, if, let's say someone then notices that it hasn't been updated for any of those units, they had gotten a rental increase in August of last year, let's say January now, and this is last year. So they went 4 months, they had a rent increase, and they're saying, my building was not compliant because he or she, the landlord, did not update within the 30-day window. Would it be up to the hearing officer whether that person deserves just to be paid back that rent increase, even if all rent increases were within the AGA? Like that, it would be up to the hearing officer to determine if that's non-compliance?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be up to the hearing officer's discretion. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Clarify on that, but for our purposes, for the letters and the database as proposed, it's a high watermark, right? So if you register, you count as in compliance, and we're not then actually looking to see if throughout the year you go in and out. We just say you were in compliance as of January 27th, so you're in compliance for 2023, right? Okay.
For the annual registration. So there is no way we can check whether or not you correctly filed if you're not filing 1 unit move in, move out in time, we have no way of knowing until you file it, right? So yeah, we are looking at mostly at the annual registration.
Sorry, correction.
Hold on. For our letters, sorry about that, but for our letters and for our database, it is a high watermark. So anyone who's looking from the public for information is looking only to a high watermark. There's no other way to get them.
Right.
Okay. Committee member Goodwill, go back to you.
My apologies. I did not mean to interrupt you. Sorry about that. But we would be able to retroactively determine that, actually. Like, we know when you modified each record, and we know the move-in date for each unit, and we know the price paid. So I guess what I'm getting at is, like, right now we don't have a notice that says, by the way, we will keep all this data of yours in perpetuity, and there's a potential that we will do a retroactive analysis to see if you were out of compliance at any point in time, and a hearing officer may have access to that information. We are not saying that right now, right? And that is not an expectation, but we absolutely, someone could very simply, a motivated tenant could go back, file and sorry, this is a question. And by understanding, they could file an information request for everything that's been submitted for their building for the past 6, 7, 8 years, however long we get this data, or we have data for, and they could look at dates modified and say, my building was out of compliance during this period of time. I want my money back for this amount of time because they were out of compliance. And that it is up to the hearing officer to determine if that's substantial non-compliance or not. Is that the proper understanding, I guess?
That's correct.
Yes.
Thank you. Last question. Sorry about that. Or that was the last question. Thank you.
Other questions before I go to public comment? Okay, seeing none. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? So please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Okay, and we're going to start off with Tim Larson.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak in support of the recommendations as drafted. I think it will be fantastic to get something to help force landlords to comply simply with registering. And so I'm, very much in favor of what has been proposed tonight. And then I would ask the question, if someone is non-compliant with registration, I'm not sure how that would impact somebody's ability to request an adjustment for AGA noncompliance. So I'm not really sure how those two things are directly compared, but maybe y'all could address that, or maybe it makes sense to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And next we'll have Teresa.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, so just a couple things. First, I would like to request a study session with stakeholders regarding the portal for tech updates that Anki mentioned. Thank you so much, Anki, for working on that. And also for the public portal proposal. And then also, I did have a question about why units that are not covered by the rent control provisions under CISPRA are required to provide rent information. I don't know what the legal basis for that is. And then the third is, what if the CISPRA portal for registration or payment of fees causes the delay? So for example, if the registration opens on December 25th, and it just feels like there has to be extensions for delays caused by, software goes down, things happen. So I think that definitely needs to be addressed, so that, the portal should be open on December 1st for registration. Let's see what else. The discussion about the RHC starting to be a code enforcement authority with inspections and determinations. I just feel like that's pretty difficult. I could see that expanding a huge cost and staffing needs. And then also finally if a housing provider has 12 units and there's something wrong with an input in one of the units, that all of the 12 units will show as not submitted. I assume that will be okay. A housing provider can easily tell, what is preventing the entire submittal to not be downloaded. I hope that makes sense. And then finally, if there is a public facing portal, if the landlord corrects something, so they, paid late or something like that, would the public portal be updated accordingly? Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Teresa. Next, we'll go to Edie. Edie.
Thank you. So I have some acknowledgement for committee member Grunwald's questions around, aren't we complaint-based? And there's a reason to move away from that. And it is the actual registration numbers. So being complaint-based, in a sense, was an experiment. It was a good experiment. The Mountain View Rental Housing Committee has done an excellent job at controlling costs compared to other jurisdictions. But the really smoking gun piece of information is, why are landlords willing to pay the fees and not willing to register? And they may say bureaucracy, this, that, but you as the Rental Housing Committee need to ask and need to be suspicious that there is non-compliance, and that the rental that, not from all landlords, but from some, and from too many. So I think you have enough information to justify taking a step away from the only complaint-based to collecting more data, so that the public and the Rental Housing Committee knows better what is happening. In your regulations that are proposed, I substantially support them. In section C3, where a second notice to the landlord includes a CC to tenants, there is one more CC that is needed. It should also be like a generic letter to the tenant, hiding tenant information, of course, but including which landlord should be included in the next RHC package. Because you don't want to have too much of this obligation fall to the tenants. You also want to let the public and the press know what is going on if a landlord has made it to that level of noncompliance. Another last step that I think needs, perhaps it's there, I just would like confirmation. And I think there needs to be support for tenants to, and encouragement for tenants to validate what their landlords entered. So, you know, there are postcards reminding renters that they have rent stabilization available to them and protecting them. And I would really include some of that communication out annually to encourage tenants how they can look and confirm that the information provided by their landlord is accurate. Not that there needs to be a big penalty if something is not accurate, but just lots of daylight. There is too much question about why landlords aren't registering. We need a lot more daylight. These regulations take us a lot further in that direction, and more notice to tenants and the public would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Edie. And next we have Joshua.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Joshua Howard with the California Apartment Association. Want to thank you for your continued interest in this issue, and want to just raise a couple of points in no particular order that I think the committee should be mindful of as you contemplate this resolution and regulation tonight. Number one, I'd encourage flexibility. Flexibility, especially for independent rental owners, small mom and pop housing providers in Mountain View who may not be tech savvy or very skilled at using the computer. Want to make sure that the staff is able to work with these independent rental owners who may not have access to or own a computer or feel comfortable with the technology to be able to make sure they can register their units appropriately without being penalized or feel that they have been left behind in this process because of technological gaps that may exist. Another speaker mentioned this, and I think it's really important. The registration portal should be tailored that the data that is collected is only relevant to what the CSFRA regulates. Therefore, for those units that are not rent regulated, anything built after 1995, there really is no reason for the program to be collecting rent data on those units. And also want to make sure that any unit that is 100% exempt from the CSFRA, anything built after the effective date of the ordinance, is not required to register because there is no jurisdiction of the RHC to regulate those units. In addition, it should be noted that if a landlord does update their information or pays their fees, that the system is updated and the public-facing portal in real time. If part of this regulation is to educate tenants as to whether or not the landlord is compliant, well, then if the landlord becomes compliant, the system should update it immediately so that there's no inadvertent complaints filed against an owner who is in compliance with the regulation. In addition, if a landlord registers or pays late, but does pay the late fee, they should immediately be considered in compliance. They've paid the penalty, they've come into compliance, and they should then therefore be deemed in compliance. And finally, this should not be an all or nothing. Meaning, if going back to the 12 unit example, if one unit can't be registered, the owner should not be penalized for doing the right thing in the other 11. So just encourage you to look at that very carefully. With that, I conclude my comments and thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Joshua. And next we have Alexander.
Yeah, I'll try to actually keep it brief. So a right without a remedy is no right at all. And in a complaint-based system, just because someone has the right to file a complaint, if they don't know that they actually have a complaint to file, who's going to help them? Like this is a step, this is a tool, this is helping people to know what they can do. This is information, this is transparency, this is how government should work, this is how the world should work. So no, this isn't a matter of changing the paradigm. someone still needs to file a petition for downward adjustment or a petition for a rollback. And under this this new system, you are just equipping yourselves with tools that allow you to help people better, that allow you to work more efficiently, that allow you to provide more information to people, to landlords, to the city. Like, this is a good. This is a net good. This is I would have liked to see it go farther, because I feel like the more tools in your toolkit, the more power you have to actually help the people of the city to stay in their homes. But hey, this is a good step. Yes, I support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Okay. Seeing no further public comments, I'm going to bring it back to the committee for deliberation and possibly a motion. Let's see. A motion. RSO regulations to add Chapter 12, compliance and general remedies. So I see Vice Chair Ramos's hand.
Nicole, most of that was frozen on my screen.
Oh, was I frozen for everybody else?
Yes.
Boo, it showed that thing. Okay, well, we brought it back to the committee for deliberation. I'm going to say Vice Chair Ramos has something she wants to say, so I'll just go to her.
So I am ready to make a motion for staff's recommendation. I did lose track of all the possible amendments to that, though. I believe one had to do with a date that was different in one regulation and the other. I would like that fixed. So that would be one amendment. I'm trying to think of any other amendments that were, I don't think there actually was any actual other amendments, although I would like to see some exploration on that, a focused stakeholder group, something that does not put a lot of stress on staff. I know that's like, I want you to find a unicorn for me and not be stressed about it. And I'm really sorry about that. But I would love something to be moved forward to at least address at least an open communication line with the property owners to ensure that like we make it easy for them to do what we want to do. That's always kind of been my hope. But yeah, I move the staff's recommendation to review and adopt amendments to CSFRA regulations and MRHRSO to add Chapter 12, compliance and general remedies, with the amendment of the corrected dates.
Okay, and I see committee member Almond's hand first.
Well, I would second that, but with the friendly amendment that I would hate to see us spend a whole lot of time in stakeholder meetings when I think the regulations are good as proposed.
Okay. So is that to say your friendly amendment is to not do a focus group on tech?
Yes. I mean, I feel like well, I guess we have to have the motion first and then we can discuss it, right?
You seconded it with a friendly amendment. So if Vice Chair accepts that friendly amendment, then we can discuss.
Right.
I think staff understands what I'm hoping to achieve with that. So I will accept that amendment and hopefully staff understands that I want some friendly communication going on.
I think that, our staff works with housing providers all the time and would go bend over backwards to try and work with the software providers to make it easier for folks, so that I don't think we need to extend the amount of time before we enact these regulations.
Okay. I mean, I don't mind keeping the regulations on the same timeline. It's just something a little extra there.
I think we're already.
So can we just get clarity? Is the motion just to adopt the regulations, or is the motion to adopt the regulations direct staff to have stakeholder meetings? And that amendment was accepted to take that out. I'm just a little unclear on.
Yes, so the original motion was to adopt the staff recommendation and the regulations with the time fix or the date fix, and to direct staff to find some way to engage in a stakeholder-like group that would be most convenient to staff. Committee member Allman asked for that to be removed as part of her condition of a second. I accepted that. And we'll go from there. Is that clear?
Thank you. Yes.
I think committee member Rolfs
you, Emily.
has something.
I just want to say that I agree with council member Almond. That's all.
Excellent. Committee member Grunwald.
This is just more of a comment, but I think I was trying to get with my questions to raise that we're not. I don't believe we're being forthcoming when we're collecting the information right now about how it's going to be used. I would. This can be part of the execution. It doesn't have to be. I think part of the regs that we're recording now, but the writing is on the wall that we're moving towards an oversight. Moving away from compliance or a complaint-based system to an oversight-based system. And in our slides previously, up until this point, whenever, let's say, staff has introduced how petitions work, they will always say, we are a complaint-based system, right? And with really starting to get to collection of critical mass of unit level data, it will move away from that, right? We will be collecting all this information. I don't feel like we're making a message to the landlord that this is going to be collected and saved in perpetuity. This is all public information. It will be publicly visible. And even the community, I think most people are probably okay with their unit number, with that information of what rent they pay being public, knowing that if someone knows their unit number, then they will know what they paid historically. But it's just not part of how we're messaging this yet. I mean, this is all initially a compliance meant we're trying to get all the buildings to pay. And we were all very concerned with we want to get to 100% registration for all buildings in Mountain View and get everybody paid to be fair to the whole system. But it is quickly going into something very different, which is now we're collecting all this information and it will be visible publicly. And officially, I'll end here and to say that we are saying that non-compliance is 30-day. If you don't update a move in or move out within 30 days, you are non-compliant, and that is retroactive and could potentially, a hearing officer could say, give back all of your rent increases, even if they were legitimately according to the AGA, because you didn't enter the move in, move out of certain units within 30 days. They could make that determination. And we're not saying anything here about what substantial is. We're just saying substantial and trusting that a hearing officer or future rental housing committees will do the right thing and define substantial noncompliance as substantial. So I think that is my concern, in that both we message to the community and to landlords that all this information is publicly available now and will be in the future. And we really define what substantial noncompliance is. That's my ask of the committee. Thank you.
Member Wilson?
I just think it's important that we clarify that if we are moving to a non-compliance base, sorry, what's it called?
Based instead of complaint based.
Thank you. Is because I don't think the other way was working. This is what we're trying to fix. I mean, it's been like what, 6 years of the CSFRA, and I know that us asking for home providers to be compliant, it's been 2 years, but it's been 6 years of the CSFRA. This is not new. It's been here for a while. So I think it's time for us to pivot to something that might work.
Well, one thing that I just wanted to bring up before we vote is we did hear, I think we've heard over at least the last several meetings, a lot of what I would consider to be valid concerns with the functionality of the technology. I think that that's been brought up and mentioned, and I believe Vice Chair Ramos's initial motion, although it got amended out around the focus group or the stakeholder meetings or something, wasn't to delay the implementation of any enforcement or notification of non-compliance mechanisms, but really to ensure that we are taking those comments at face value and in good faith and act to move those forward. And I also believe that I've heard from committee member Grunwald and potentially others some concerns with the level of data collection and retention with the tech-based solution, that there's concerns about in the future, what could it be used for? How long are the records being retained? Is there risk of something becoming more than just, hey, we have this data, but really trying to use it to act upon? So with that in mind, I do wonder if that means that maybe one of the options here for us tonight is not ripe for implementation, meaning the database one, and maybe the other two are more ripe for implementation. So I just wanted to mention that because of what I'm kind of hearing different voices say. But with that being said, if there's no more discussion points, I do know we have a motion with a second and we can take a vote on it. Patricia?
I did want
You
to
wanna
clarify that the public facing search function of this will not show per unit data. It does not show that level of information. And I just wanted to make sure that that was clarified at this time.
Naz, did you want to jump in there real quick?
Yeah, I also wanted to clarify that landlords that are currently in compliance with the registration requirements, this data is in the system. We have it for them. And a tenant could, submit a public record request right now for that information. So it's really the landlords who are not in compliance who we don't have that information for. The landlords who are in compliance, our policy is not changing as far as the data that's being collected or the data that needs to be retained pursuant to state law.
Okay. Committee member Grunwald, did you have a comment? I saw your hand up and then down.
I would agree with those comments that it is. I think it's just not known that it's public data and it's there in the database, and someone just has to ask for it, right? And that will become more with the level of visibility from these regs and from the registration asks. I feel like that will become more visible. And I'll leave it there.
Vice Chair Ramos, do you have a comment before we maybe do a vote?
I just had a quick question. I don't think it actually has to do with the vote, but is there currently a mechanism in place for a tenant to verify that what their landlord input their unit is correct?
As we mentioned, they can do a public record request.
And if it's for their specific unit and they have a way to prove that, they can, contact staff and we can look the information up as well. That is an option. And I also wanted to clarify quickly that the system that we have works very well for registration and fees in terms of us knowing what's happening and where people are at. So I did want to clarify that piece of it too. The challenge that people are having has to do with some of the other technical aspects like the bulk uploads and everything that has to do with that for the larger units. But if you are a smaller property owner, or if you are a larger property owner, we do hold very regular meetings for registration and how to register, where Andrea walks property owners through the process. It's quite interactive. And now, because the COVID regulations have been lifted, we will start to host those in person at the library and do more one-on-one workshops in person to help people who might have technological issues and challenges. We have the infrastructure for that. And now that again, we're not limited by COVID regulations. We can actually start doing that for this next cycle. So some of those concerns that were voiced will be alleviated during this this coming registration cycle.
I had a slight memory of trying out the tenant side of the registry. It was like a really long time ago. I don't know if there was any change, but is there a way that you can actually use that for the tenant? Like just say it's like, this is my unit, and then see what the landlord submitted. I don't know if that's like too much extra work or like no value at all, but
that's not part of the system at this time, but we have spoken with the vendor.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so I know we have a motion on the floor and we should do a roll call vote. I believe the motion, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but it is to adopt the Chapter 12 compliance and general remedies for both CSFRA regulations and MHRSO regulations with a tweak to the date, the effective date on the MHRSO regulation to make that December 1, 2022 as well. That's the motion, right? Okay, can we do the roll call vote, Jessica, unless anyone else has anything else before we do that?
Okay. Committee member Pardo Dizella,
Aye.
committee member Rosas,
Aye.
committee member Almond,
Aye.
vice chair Ramos,
Aye.
chair Haynes Livesay.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okie dokie. Well, thank you, everyone. We will now move to agenda item 9.3, Rental Housing Committee meeting schedule for calendar year 2023. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
Thank you, Chair Haynes. This will be a very, very short presentation, but I would like to review the dates for the next calendar year with the members of the Rental Housing Committee in order for you to be able to set your meeting schedule for 2023. So these are the proposed times, very much similar to what we have done this year, and with the note that in your discretion, you can always add additional meetings on as needed basis, which we have done in the past year, for instance, to hear an appeal or even to further extend our virtual meetings, which we had to do in the past every 30 days. So I would love to hear if anyone has any remarks or comments on the proposed dates for next year.
I do have one. I would really, I know we didn't do it this year, but I would really love for us not to meet on Juneteenth. I do think that it would be nice to avoid that date.
The same date.
You did. So June 19th is Juneteenth. Could we maybe do the 12th or the 26th?
Yeah, I would then do it a week earlier, because that's where we adopt a budget, and then the budget needs to go into the city council budget, and then they have to adopt their budget. So June 12th would then be a better option.
Okay. Vice Chair Ramos?
This is a question that may be more than the proposed dates, but I would love for staff to start thinking about moving toward having a public work plan, similar to how other committees have a work plan that's like for the entire year. I understand that as we got started, a lot of it was just getting stuff up and running. And then I think that we almost hit a point where we're like, okay, we could start looking at that, getting something that's a consistent work plan, kind of like how city council, they have a priority session of things and topics that they want to do. And then we know over time based on what staff is, so that people, we we have been really responding to most things as they come, which is great. But there's going to be a time when that actually quiets down, or I hope. I think we would have been at that point earlier if it wasn't for the pandemic, which rapidly changed how our rental stock was like. I don't think there's a motion in relation to that or anything like that, but it's something that I would love to hear staff's feedback on something.
So actually it is planned for the next month. Actually, every year in October, we have a work plan. We submit a very general work plan, and we are happy to include topics that you would like to see addressed. And I'm happy to accept any proposals before the meeting so I can work them in the work plan, or we can discuss topics in the next meeting and give them a space where you would like to see them on the agenda. Absolutely.
Thank you. I felt a little like city council, they look at the other the advisory board committees. We're not an advisory board committee, but they look at their work plans, and so they have a good sense of what they're doing. And I really would like to build that relationship with our city council again, and maybe have something for them to look at, just like, hey, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, so if you would first prefer to do a goal setting, task setting before you make a work plan, but that work plan still does not need to go to the city council, but you can decide whatever you want to send up to city council. That is not limited to an annual work plan. That is, yeah, anything, like we've sent letters to them before. But if you would like, if the rental housing committee would like a goal setting session, we could add that to it.
Why are we doing that? Just as a question. I mean, because I know you would like us to be the city, I know you would like the city council to know what we're doing. I don't know if we need to, because then it makes me feel that it just puts us in a gray area.
How so?
Like, I don't know. People may have the perception that the reason why we're doing this is so that the city council can nay or can approve or deny any of our agenda items that we have on here. So I just want to be cautious of that.
I just want to be collaborative whenever possible.
Well, we've talked about, reporting back to city council as things come up, and we've done that. And I know we always have a general work plan for the year. So I don't see that we need to do anything in addition to that. I mean, there are going to be issues that come up that will add to our agenda, but I think what maybe committee member Rosas is saying is we're an independent body, so we get to set our annual agenda, and we don't need to report back. I mean, we can choose to report back to council, but we don't need their approval.
Right? And I'm not saying that we need their approval. I just think that it's a nice collaborative thing to do, to just have that communication line open.
Oh, sure. I think, but I don't think we've closed it.
So for this item, I think we're just talking calendar. It sounds
Yes.
like in October, we're going to do work plan. So maybe we can discuss what to do with said work plan once we are talking about the work plan in October.
That's why we have a chair.
Do you have a question calendar related?
No, thank you, Chair. This is why we have a chair. Thank you so much.
Okay, do we have any more questions for staff on the proposed dates? If not, I will go to public comment. Okie dokie. Would any member of the public on the line like to comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on the phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Okay. Seeing none, we will now go to committee deliberations and provide feedback on the proposed dates for 2023. Vice Chair Ramos.
Do we need a motion for this?
Uh,
Oh, yes, we do. I see it on the agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Yes.
All right, so I move to adopt the resolution establishing a meeting schedule for the Rental Housing Committee for calendar year 2023 to be read in title only, further being waived, but to include the change in the June date from June 19th to June 12th in honor of Juneteenth. That's my motion.
Committee Member Rosas?
Can I make a friendly amendment?
Sure.
I just realized that Monday is December the 11th, and that's actually my birthday. So I want to be present, but I may not be present on that day if we're gonna have it on that day. So I would propose to have it maybe the week before December 11th, so that I can have a.
That's
December
probably
4th.
Labor Day.
Oh my goodness. Really?
No,
Yeah.
December.
December, I'm talking
Oh,
about.
December. Oh, I thought you said September. Sorry.
No, December, because I just realized, I'm like, wait, I looked down, I'm like, oh my God, my birthday, I would like to have it off.
Can we do the 18th then, December 18th?
Let me look up, probably, I mean, I would be okay, let me see. Let me go, I'm pretty sure it's gonna be okay, December 18th. Yeah, that works.
I accept that amendment. Did you second?
The 18th, I thought we said.
I mean, the 18th.
December.
Is that
18th.
also a second?
Oh, is there a second?
Me,
yes.
You did the second.
Who does the second? Vice
You
Chair?
did. You did.
You did.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay. So let's have a roll call vote with the two changes of June 12th and December 18th as our new dates.
Committee Member Pardo de Zella. I didn't hear you.
Aye.
Okay. Committee Member Rosas.
Aye.
Committee Member Almond.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ramos.
Aye.
Chair Haynes Livesay.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, committee members and staff. We will now move to the committee and staff announcements and updates, and I will hand it back to the staff for some presentations.
Item 10, thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee. As we go through this, we're almost done this evening. Item 10 is an opportunity for us to review some of the upcoming schedule for the month. We have our Housing and Eviction Help Center that happens on the first and third Thursdays of the month in the library on the first floor in the program room, and it's from 1 to 5. People can come in from the community and receive assistance with learning about housing programs, including our own rent stabilization program, eviction help, receive legal resources and legal assistance on site, and get information on food distribution, financial assistance, mediation, homelessness prevention resources, and more. We have quite a few organizations that actually come and are here on the first Thursday. And then on that third Thursday, we also hold a workshop from 4 to 5 in the afternoon. And that is a hybrid model. We have virtual office hours every Tuesday from 10 to 12. And people can register online or contact staff to make an appointment. And then we have our monthly workshops and events. Excuse me one second. Pardon me. This month we have been providing support for the City Manager's Office Guaranteed Basic Income Program, Elevate MV. Our office is actually providing assistance for signing up potentially eligible participants. We provided assistance on Friday for this. We had 20 people that came to our office and received one-on-one support with these applications. And also we provided support on Saturday at the library. Our staff will again provide assistance on Friday, the 23rd from 1 to 6 p.m. and on Saturday at the library. We will also be at the Community Health and Wellness Fair on Saturday too, which is being held at the community center in the Redwood Hall. And then we'll have a tenant protections workshop at the senior center on September 29th at 1 o'clock p.m. in the social hall. And that concludes staff's informative update on our upcoming workshops. On October 20th, I think we have a meeting before then, but just in case, we actually will also be having a workshop focused on habitability and maintenance.
Are there any questions or comments from committee members? Vice Chair Reynolds.
Not about the office hours or workshops, but if we're doing committee staff reports, we got invited in our last meeting to the Shoreline West Neighborhood Association as a committee. It was lovely. That's all I wanted to report.
Awesome report. Any other comments, announcements from committee members or city staff?
Sorry, I missed it. I wanted to go.
Anything else? Going once? Okay. Well, with that, if we have no other comments or announcements, the meeting is adjourned.
No.
Oh, nope.
No, you
Oh,
still have
right.
a closed session report.
That's right. Thank you, Karen.
I didn't want
Alrighty.
everybody to
We will
leave.
go to legal counsel for the closed session report.
Yes, so the RHC met in closed session at the beginning of this meeting to discuss two pending litigation matters, the matter of Redwood Villa versus City of Mountain View and Mountain View Rental Housing Committee, and the matter of Enlightened Investments versus City of Mountain View and the Mountain View Rental Housing Committee. No action was taken on either of those items at this time. Now you can adjourn.
Okay. Thank you, Karen, for keeping me on track too. Okay, with that, the meeting is adjourned at 9:53 p.m. The next Rental Housing Committee meeting is scheduled to be held on Monday, October 17th, 2022 at 7 p.m. We will see you all then. Thank you very much.